I am so excited to introduce Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota's 5th Congressional District. Representative Omar is a proudly progressive member of Congress. Her strong leadership made her among the first endorsements Move On members made in the 2020 election cycle. The clarity of purpose and public service she always brings to representing her constituents was on display on January 6th, when she was among the first members of Congress to publicly call for Donald Trump to be impeached for his incitement of violence. We later learned from news reports that Representative Omar wasted no time in moving to action, drafting impeachment articles even while sheltering from the violent mob attacking her and other lawmakers. Welcome, Congressman. We are so happy to have you here with us tonight.
Thank you, Olga. I'm so excited to be here with you all.
We've reached a complex crossroads in history where we should be celebrating, like Rana said, the new incoming administration, the majority in the House and Senate, flipping Georgia blue in a historic race, and so much more. But because of the actions of a destructive minority and its enablers, our celebrations are bittersweet and marred by the violence of January 6th and the current ongoing threats of violence across the country. Can you talk about how we should be meeting this moment right now?
Well, thank you so much for that question, and it's one that I have continued to think about. I think to Rahna's point, it is important as we think about being hopeful for what is to come, because we are able to count the hours until we are able to put this Trump's presidency in the dustbin of history. But it is really important also for us to think about what accountability should look like for those who have incited this violent and deadly insurrection, who have been part of the failed attempted coup, who have in word and deed helped lead a rebellion against our government, against the seat of democracy, against those who have taken an oath to protect our republic from foreign and domestic enemies. And there are a lot of people who will talk about what it means for us to move on, to think about healing, to think about coming together, to speak about unity, to sort of speed up this process of moving from this dark moment in our nation's history that we all find ourselves in. And then there are those on the other side, those of us who have felt the anger, the frustration, the trauma, and the terror of that day and of the last 4 years, who are calling really for reckoning to take place. And I think it is important for us to think about what our response should be, because how we respond in this moment is critical. We are all terrorized by what happened. I feel terrorized by what happened, but our answer cannot be a broader security structure or a deeper police state. We cannot make policies guided by terror. We do not abide by those principles that are not part of our values and our principles. We cannot really, say that we didn't do everything possible to create tools that will at some point be turned on the most vulnerable and the most marginalized in our communities, that will further terrorize them. And so I know that if we are to look at what it means for us to bring people to account, what it means for us to engage in a restorative process, what it means for us to think about reconciliation, it all comes to two things. It has to include truth, and it has to be rooted in justice. And so, as someone who has survived a civil war, someone who has risen from the ashes of destruction, I know that when people are going through the kind of pain and moments of darkness like we are at the moment, it is easy to want to hasten that process, to allow for people to, as my grandfather used to say, change their shirts, to come back and, and to think of themselves as part of, the new systems that we are creating without there being an accountability. And I think about people like Lindsey Graham. I think about Ted Cruz, and I think about Josh Hawley, and I think about, some of my colleagues in the House, like Minority Leader McCarthy, or Matt Gaetz, or others, who have fueled this fire for so long, who have called white supremacists heroes and friends and allies, who have spoken in rallies where the unifying theme was hate and anger and rage towards people who have stood up to be part of our political discourse and to serve our country. And today, we cannot allow for those people without speaking to the big lie that they have utilized to whip people into frenzy, to now just right say let bygones be bygones, appeal to people's better angels, and and continue to be part of a system of governance, which in our case is our democracy, to not be held to account. And part of that accountability is making sure that they speak the truth to the big lie that they have weaponized. And that is to say that this election, although there are Black and brown people who have shown up in big numbers, was not stolen. And the president that we will swear in on the 20th has a legitimate right to be sworn in. And that our country has, for a long time, had systems that have held these people behind in their ability to fully participate in our democracy. And that an uprising that is to speak of oppression and police brutality cannot be held to the same level and the same weight as a riot, an attempted coup, an insurrection, a rebellion, and against our democracy. And if we are to collectively move forward, we can't both side everything. And if we are to collectively move forward, traitors cannot be held as patriots. And if we are to collectively move forward, cowards and people who are inciting violence against those of us who have held to our oath of office are not enemies. And once we can establish that, then the process can begin for us to move collectively as a nation.
Thank you for that. All of that really rings true. And you talked a lot about accountability and how some of your colleagues are friends and allies with white supremacists. I think there are a lot of people who think that once Trump is out of office, these problems go away. Can you talk a little bit about what comes next after he's out of office? Why do you think it's important that the Senate should convict Trump?
It is very important because of two things, actually, for me. I know that everybody has, a list of reasons on why they think this is an important endeavor for us to engage in. One, I think, we didn't arrive here by accident. Trump is not a mistake. Our democracy and its vulnerability were being exploited and have been exploited by someone who I have considered a tyrant since the first day he was sworn into office. And if this tyrant is not held accountable, and if we allow for a president who has led a rebellion, who has failed in his attempted coup, who has incited an insurrection, to not be held accountable because, one, there were only a few days left because of the election, and two, because they're no longer in office, then we risk, right, history repeating itself. And that is a dangerous step for us to take. And secondly, I think there is a message, not just to our nation, but to the world, that we have to send about our democracy and what it stands for. We talk about ourselves as being a nation of laws, as being a nation where your actions have consequences, and where nobody is above the law. And so if we do not follow through with that, right, if we do not see our values and principles carried out in this moment where it's most needed, then it makes the principles and the values that we have spoken of for so long meaningless, not just to the people of our country, but to the rest of the world. And I think for those two reasons, he does need to get convicted no matter what in the Senate. And I think it is really important for us not to think about the politics of it, not to think about the time and the resources that it will take, because it is essentially one of the most important things that we can do as lawmakers.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman, and thank you so much for spending time with us today. Are there any last words you'd like to share that you think we should keep in mind, us and our viewers, in the coming few days?
Well, like I said earlier, I mean, I think, you know, we have found out that our democracy is as fragile as, you know, any other democracy has been. And, you know, there are no saviors. There is no magic wand. And it is going to take all of us to fix the mess that has been created the last 4 years. Um, but it is going to also be really important for us to not just get stuck in that mess, but to holistically look at the brokenness of the systems that have brought us to this moment, the fragileness of not just our democracy but of our society, the backsliding that we have seen, the vulnerabilities that we are all living through, the trauma that many of us are experiencing, all were in the making for so long. And if we do not take the time to fully examine and investigate, we will find ourselves in this position, if not in 4 years, but certainly in 10 years and in 20 years.
That's right. That's right. Thank you again so much for joining us, Congresswoman. It's always a pleasure. And thank you for all the work you're doing on our behalf.
Thank you for having me.